Welcome to the latest episode of First Word in Sport. An interesting one this Friday morning. We are joined by John Knight. I have done a couple of podcasts with John, mainly on golf, but he also loves his football. Welcome, John.
Thank you, Luke. Morning, James. Good to be here. Looking forward to talking about a bit of football and looking forward to an interesting weekend.
So let's look back on what happened earlier this week. Hasn't been that many games, so we've only had 4 Premier League games. So it's been an unusually quiet week. Let's start on Monday evening. We had the thriller West Ham and Crystal Palace. Ended up 0-0. What are your thoughts, John, on that particular one?
I mean, it wasn't the best game, was it? I think in the second half, it kind of felt like Palace were there for the taking, and I think West Ham only had something like 0.12 xG in the second half, and so I don't know if you feel like it was a wasted opportunity for West Ham or whether it was a good point. I think Nuno, just by his nature, is sort of risk averse, isn't he? So I think just given the situation, they felt like, all right, we'll take our point, we'll move a little bit further away from Spurs. But I don't know. I think from a Spurs fan's perspective, I was pretty worried that they were going to win that, especially in the second half, and I felt like pretty relieved, I think, when the final whistle went, and they're still sort of within reach. So that probably implies to me, from a West Ham perspective, that maybe it was a bit of a missed opportunity. I don't know what you guys think.
James?
Yeah, morning everyone. I agree with John there. Like, West Ham are probably an away point in the Premier League this stage of the season isn't bad. It's another clean sheet. Yeah, it wasn't a great game of football at all, but I think where West Ham are, London derby, Palace are half decent at the moment. I think they'll take the 0-0. If you offered them a 0-0 at the start of the game, I think they probably said, yeah, we'll take it, move on, try and beat Everton this weekend at home. They need to win home games, West Ham, to stay up, and that's the most important thing for them.
I certainly don't think it does them any harm. I think when you look back on the season, a 0-0 draw away at Crystal Palace isn't where, if you get relegated, where you lost it, per se. And I think it's interesting because we'll look ahead to this weekend's games a little bit later. But I do think we will get swept up in the emotion of, it's easy to win Premier League games. And it's just not. That Crystal Palace team's a good team. And I think don't think it's that easy, or not nearly as easy as people make out to be.
Yeah, I will say, by the way, fair play to Nuno. I mean, he's really turned around West Ham from the shambles that they were in the first half of the season. And really, when you look at Nuno now, did a reasonable job at Wolves. Obviously, he had that spell at Spurs where he wasn't ever really the right man for the job. But then you look at Forest. I mean, he had Forest almost in the Champions League and got sacked at the start of this season, sort of ridiculously, really. And now he's doing all right at West Ham. And so you actually look across his managerial career and you think, well, this guy, he's obviously got kind of a defensive, counter-attacking style. But, he's probably got a reasonable CV that he's put together now, I think.
Well, let's talk of CVs. Someone who doesn't have much on his CV, really, relative to the job he got, would be Mr. Rosenior. Chelsea no more. I think it's rare you see a performance from a team that is so bad that there is just universal condemnation of it, and his sacking felt inevitable this week. So obviously they went to Brighton, got absolutely walloped 3-0. Could have been any number, really. And not just the scoreline, the performance was horrendous with it. And I'd have a little bit of sympathy, just quickly, for him, in that, when you concede after 3 minutes or whatever it is to a shot, a slight deflection, everything sort of goes out the window. And I do think these things are slightly underrated. It's very easy for Brighton after that. But what that team put out there, it wasn't good. I know you love managers being sacked, James. What were your thoughts?
When I saw the team used in a team selection, any manager that plays 3 at the back or 5 at the back, it's red flags immediately. It just smacks to me that they've got not a clue what they're doing, run out of ideas. Yeah, they conceded early, but he changed it at half time because he knew he got it wrong. He made Enzo captain the game after dropping him for 2 games. He was just way out of his depth. We knew about that when he was appointed in January the 6th. He had a good couple of games win, didn't he? And he lost 5 in a trot without scoring. Just completely average depth. It was just an odd appointment. It was just a puppet appointment by Bowley and co. But the players completely gave up, by the way. They just didn't want him there at all. They just didn't bother trying. They didn't bother running. It was like, we're not going to win tonight. We're not going to try. We want you out of the job. And no surprise, on Wednesday afternoon, news came through that he'd been sacked and they appointed the under-21 coach who took charge a couple of games, I think it was. He got that 1-1 draw, didn't he, at Man City when he was appointed over Christmas and New Year time. So you watch on Sunday in the Cup, you watch how much further they run and the attitude completely changes. But you just have to look at Cole Palmer's Twitter feed or his whatever it was, Instagram. I mean, that's just modern day football really, isn't it? It's just pathetic. Yeah, they've got big issues, Chelsea, on and off the field. Real big issues.
So, question for you, John, with regard to Chelsea. I mean, we've talked about this offline in terms of their underlying numbers haven't been that bad in this season, and it's always difficult when you're looking at football, the sort of disconnect between the sort of numbers and all the other ingredients that actually make a team in terms of players actually wanting to turn up. Talk us through Chelsea in terms of how you see it at the moment.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, right? Because I think the general view is that the underlying numbers reflect how good a team is, and then it's sort of luck that dictates the results from there. And there's obviously more to it than that. So I guess there's sort of hidden ingredients that might turn underlying numbers into results. There might be some managerial effects. I know you like to talk about Emery in that sense, and that there probably is something in that there's the intangibles of what a manager does. And then also like experience, I think, might play a part in that. And Chelsea have got the youngest team in the league. Villa, I think, have got oldest or maybe second oldest. And I think maybe that is sort of an underrated part of the game, that you want these players like McGinn, let's say, right, who it took quite a few years, I think, even for you to appreciate how important someone like John McGinn is, because, he doesn't look particularly athletic or whatever. And, he doesn't really catch the eye with things that he's doing, but then you just realize he's the leader in the dressing room. And so you look at Chelsea, I think they're sort of the opposite of Villa in the sense that, yes, they've got good underlying numbers because they have got talent and they can really blow teams away when everything's right. But then they will just sort of throw away games. Like the home game against Villa this season was a good example of that, I think, where they absolutely murdered Villa in the first half and then just sort of fell apart and lost the game. And so I think there's a few elements like that. Chelsea, poor management, lack of experience, lack of leadership. But I don't think they're too far away. There's still a lot of talent there. And if they could sort out those things, maybe just get a decent manager in and bring in maybe some really established veterans to lead the team, I think they could become challengers at the top very quickly.
I think one thing I would say is I see Bowley and co getting a lot of criticism. And I think some of it's obviously justified in terms of you can't justify the appointment of Rosenior in any shape or form. And, we talked on here, didn't we, James, about how it was the wrong appointment. As soon as it happened, it just felt the wrong appointment. And it's sort of shown that way. But I will give Bowley a little bit of grace, I think, in terms of I see what he does with the LA Dodgers baseball. And it's obviously a different sport. But that is a sport he's having unbelievable success in. These guys aren't stupid. And I know a lot of people want to make out that they are complete morons. But I think you're selling them very, very short. Yes, they may not know as much about football as they need to. But as you say, I don't think it takes a huge amount for them to, particularly with the money they're willing to throw at it. And honestly, the willingness they have to bend all the rules going as well. They are desperate to win as a club. And, I'd be a bit nervous writing Bowley and co off, I think.
Yeah. The problem is, though, they're not going Champions League football next season. So they're not finishing top 5 and if Villa win come 5th, which doesn't look likely, but they still might. They're not getting Champions League football, so they're going to have to sell some players. They're going to have to sell. I know Palmer's the noise about him. Would he go back to Manchester, Man United? Who knows? Cavsedia's just signed a new contract, but contracts in football really mean nothing. Just means to get extra few bob in a transfer fee. Enzo's surely not going to stay there. they've got big issues, like kind of thing. You can talk about like they need some experience, but they haven't got any experience off the field at all at the moment, managerial level. I mean, I'm just looking at the odds for the next managerial market, like Iroda's favourite. But will Iroda go there? Because he wants to go back to Spain and manage Bilbao, doesn't he? That's the rumour at the moment. And then you're looking at
they've literally just signed. I think they've just announced someone whose name escapes me for a moment.
Who Bilbao have?
I think so.
So that might be not going there. And then you look at Fabregas. He's got no experience. He's got 2 years at Como. You're looking at Glasgow's not a big enough job for them. So they've got to make decisions. But you don't trust the actual people at Chelsea, the hierarchy, to make the right decision. They've had 6 managers in 4 seasons there? Full seasons have been taken over since took over from Roman back in the day, or 5 years. It's not looking good on and off the field. No, they've got some good players, but they need an awful lot more. They need a goalkeeper for starters. Need some experience at centre backs. Need a centre forward, because João Pedro's not playing. Delap doesn't look up for it. They're going to have to spend a load more money trying to get back to where they want to be.
I think one of the problems I have if they're going to sell players, just the way the finances work, is obviously selling youngsters in terms of amortizations and things like that. It makes a lot more sense for you as a club. Whereas, if you sell Enzo Fernandez, you're never going to recoup the transfer fee. So actually, it doesn't really benefit you as a club in terms of addressing some of the financial holes that they have in the books. And the same applies to even Palmer, because Palmer wasn't cheap when they signed him in the first place. So they do have a problem in that they've sold a lot of their young homegrown players. And the other problem they have is Esteval. So I saw it described as a grade 4 hamstring tear. I've never heard of a grade 4 hamstring tear. Only normally 1, 2 and 3. So he could be in a whole world of trouble in terms of where that leaves him get further down the line. But it certainly would temper anyone's expectation to go and spend 100 million on him or something silly.
Actually, can I just touch on that point about the baseball? Because I think that's really interesting that these guys have had success in baseball. If you think of how baseball is as a sport, yes, it's a team sport, but it's not really if you look at how players perform. Like when a pitcher goes out there, he's on his own. When a batter goes out there, he's just doing his own thing. I don't know if there's really the same kind of teamwork and team building aspect that you have in something like football. And also managers, like let's be brutally honest, the manager in baseball is just, you could play with no manager, it would be fine. And so I do think it's kind of interesting that they've looked at this job from a sort of accumulation of young talent perspective, which in something like baseball is probably a really good way to operate. If you can just hoover up loads of young talent, you're going to be in a great position. And they've come into football and thought, oh, look, we can just do that. And it kind of worked. Like they've got an okay team together, but for the amount that they've spent, I mean, it's nowhere near where they would want to be. So I do wonder if they're sort of missing some of those ingredients of how to build an actual team with leaders, not only on the pitch, but the manager as well. Bringing in someone like Rosenior, I think, is a good example of that, right? Because you could probably do that in baseball. Oh, let's just give it to that guy. He's, we know him. He's a yes man. He's a nice guy or whatever. And it's just, everyone in football knew that that's just not going to work. It's ridiculous.
I think what's interesting with Chelsea is, I mean, you touched on it, was I think it's an unbelievable, and maintain it's the same with the Tottenham job. I think they're unbelievable jobs for someone, if they get the right appointment. There's so much upside, and I don't think you necessarily need to be all that amazing for the fans to absolutely love you. Let's talk. Any more thoughts on Chelsea, James?
No, not really. It's just quite hilarious how they're singing about we want our Chelsea back. And is it pre-Roman or is it actual Roman 2004 when he took over with all the dodgy money? But yeah, no. I like a couple of their players though, but probably not going to happen.
I think just quickly on that game, I will touch on Brighton. Impressive yet again. They obviously let the team down against Tottenham last weekend, but they are putting together some pretty impressive results, and they're really putting a bit of a surge on for that 6th place, and that 6th place could easily see them get Champions League football, if nothing else, Europa League football. So their underlying numbers are good. They're playing nice football. Don't have too many injuries. Don't have too many games. I think you wouldn't. Let's put it this way. I don't think you want to play against them in the coming weeks. I don't think.
Yeah, they're looking good, and going into next season, they're going to be very interesting. I mean, I guess they might sell a player or two. I'm sure they'll recruit well because they always do, and so yeah, they'll be very interesting. I think going into next year.
One player I do need to mention for Brighton, who is Pascal Gross. It's absolutely nuts if you look at the numbers, how much Brighton have improved since he's come into the team. So they spent a lot of the early part of the season messing around with combinations of Ayari, Baleba, Gomez, Hinchelwood, and then suddenly they've hit upon, Hinchelwood, Gross, and oh my God, Milner originally in the start of this run. Milner's obviously got injured, and then Ayari's come back in for a few games. Baleba started against Chelsea. And what they have done is they've just found a really nice balance in that midfield. And the results have been absolutely transformed since Gross has come back in. I think his re-signing in January should probably go down. I mean, everyone will talk about Lacazette in terms of signing of the season. But I think the re-signing of Gross in January has to be right up there.
Right, and what were we just talking about with Chelsea? We're talking about experience, leadership. How old is Gross? What, 33, 34? I mean, so this isn't a player who's physically at his prime or anything like that, but just coming in and leading the team and organising and all the things that are just the intangibles. He's clearly made a huge difference to Brighton.
Okay, let's touch on the other two games. Bournemouth Leeds ended up 2-2. A few controversial moments towards the end of that game. Bournemouth were a little bit unlucky in terms of a goal ruled offside, which would have put it 3-1 in game over. And then in the injury time, we had the Longstaff, goal. Really nice finish. But, it raises questions to me about, the offside rule interfering with play, affecting a keeper, essentially. He's had the shot, the ball's gone between the defender, the attacker and the goalkeeper. So the goalkeeper's blinded. At one point the ball goes out of the goalkeeper's vision because the player who's offside is in his line of view. Yes, there's a good chance he wouldn't have got to it anyway, but I find the inconsistency with this rule just, mind-boggling, really. Is either, all these are onside or they're not. The way they're arbitrarily sort of picking, what is offside and not, it just drives you crazy as a fan.
It's an entertainment sport. I have no issues really with the goal, to be honest. The keeper's getting nowhere near it.
And well, don't stand offside. It's simple. Don't stand offside in the keeper's around the goal. You can't be affecting play, honestly, like that.
Then you could argue that if you're on the field of play, you're affecting play, aren't you? So the keeper's not. The big thing for me is the keeper didn't appeal that he was offside. So he knew he wasn't going to get it, and that's why I think why they've just allowed it and gone. It's not really interfering to play. The keeper's going to get nowhere near it. He's not going to save it. They've allowed it. But then it's the same if you go back to the Virgil van Dijk header at the Etihad. Donnarumma's getting nowhere near it. Obviously, that didn't make a difference in the game anyway. But it's just, they make it up as they go along. That's infuriates fans and coaches alike. Iraola went crazy, obviously, because they could have moved up to 6 ahead of Brighton. It's just inconsistent with VAR, isn't it? That we all get annoyed about. However, I'm not too upset that wasn't chalked off, to be honest.
I mean, I tend to be a defender of the refs overall, I would say, and I do think that this rule in particular just seems incredibly difficult. I mean, you're gonna have people that go one way, people that go the other way on it. If they try and come up with a rule where they are consistent, you're gonna have some terrible examples where there's going to be an absolute thunderbolt going in from 25 yards in the top corner, and it will get disallowed because they'll say, well, if you look at the angles, he's technically in the way of the keeper. So I don't know. It feels like one of these problems that VAR has kind of brought about, because I've been watching football a long time, same as you boys, and I don't really remember there were big problems with this kind of stuff. If someone cracked in a volley like that Longstaff, a lovely goal, I don't think anyone would have been looking at the replay and going, "Oh my God, that should have been disallowed." So I think that now there's extra scrutiny over everything, and extra expectations of consistency, because of course everyone could remember the case from earlier in the season that went against their team, or was in a big game or something that was ruled a different way, and they say, "Well, why wasn't this ruled the same way?" Because now it is VAR. I think there is more of an expectation that there's going to be this sort of uniform application of decisions, whereas before VAR, I think we accepted that, well, it just kind of, the ref would judge based on the situation at the time. So I've got an enormous amount of sympathy. I think this is one of the most difficult ones.
I would tend to agree. I think the very simple premise I would work on is, as long as you're not touching, if there's any physical contact with the keeper, obviously should be ruled out. But if the keeper loses sight of the ball because that defender is in his way, I think it should be disallowed. And, it's quite simple. The player can be stood to the side of him in an offside position, okay? And the ball go between that defender or that attacker and the goalkeeper. That's fine. But as a general rule, if the goalkeeper's losing sight to the ball, then that player is clearly interfering with, play. And once you go down, it's like so many of these other rules that we've seen is of unintended consequences. Once you've gone down this rule and the expectation is that this rule's there, then you have to enforce it properly. You can't just arbitrarily go, oh, that doesn't, that will stand or that one won't. It's just a nonsense. That ball clearly went between, he lost sight of that ball. And in terms of appealing for it, you just conceded a last-minute goal. The last thing you're thinking about is he doesn't know that the player in front of him was necessarily an attacking player. He could have thought it was his own player, right? So in terms of him not complaining, we don't want to get to a situation where every single time anything happens, everyone has to complain for them to actually get a decision. Which is, we see all the time. We saw that with the Gabriel Haaland situation last weekend, where the justification was, well, Haaland didn't go down, so it can't have been that bad. We can't be wanting players to react to get decisions.
It's the same though as the penalty, isn't it? If the player goes down, they're more likely to get a penalty, and if they stay on their feet, not likely to get a penalty. But it's just tricky, as John said. It's like before VAR, that would just be allowed, and it'd be get on with it kind of thing and move on. 2-2, no one would be talking about it. We wouldn't be talking about it. Because
we have
goal
VAR
is now looked at. Yeah. No.
So the bigger game, arguably, just quickly, that obviously sees Leeds, up to 40 points now. You have to think they're safe on that total, or very close to. The other big game, obviously, on Wednesday night.
Manager of the season, Daniel Farker? Got to be in the conversation.
I think Farker, Lebris has to be up there. Andrews. I think it's only a few.
Yeah. It's impressive what he's done.
Personally, I would joint award between Frank and Tudor if they manage to take Spurs down. That's a proper job. So obviously Wednesday night we saw Burnley Man City. Man City ended up winning 1-0. Pretty uninspiring game. Given nice goal from Haaland early on. City sort of huffed and puffed, couldn't get any more than that. So my big takeaway from this, and it'll be a question for you, John, in terms of just from a sort of betting perspective. So there seemed to be a lot of doom and gloom about this result from a City point of view. I guess it was a bit like the Tottenham result on Monday night in terms of West Ham. It could have been a lot worse for Tottenham fans there. This game could have been a lot worse for Arsenal fans. The Arsenal fans seem to be quite happy. But the reality is that Manchester City's price to win the league, it fluctuated a little bit from 1.76-ish down to 1.73, and now it's back up to 1.77. In essence, it was as the market expected, really.
Yeah, and I think that tells you it was about par, the result. It was important that they won the game, first and foremost. And of course, they would have liked to thrash them 5 or 6-0. That's not as easy to do as people might expect. They did play well. They dominated the game. So I think that's an aspect as well. If City had come out and won but played really badly and been fortunate, then people might have questioned, maybe they're going off the boil or whatever. So, they played well. They just couldn't get the ball in the net. They could have easily won 4-0 with the same performance. And so one thing I was thinking about actually with this, with the goal difference, when we get to the end of the season, we're going to have this situation where Man City are playing Villa on the last day, when Villa might have just played in the Europa League final. You're going to have Arsenal playing Palace, who might be just about to play the Conference League final. So you've got a situation where you're going to have opponents that are not interested in the game, may even be playing a weakened side, and then one of them could get thrashed 6 or 7-0 to decide the league. Which, we'll never hear the end of that if it happens. But I know that some international leagues use head-to-heads instead of goal difference. I'm curious whether you fellas think that might be a better way to decide it. Obviously, at this point in time, we know that would favour Man City. So we'll avoid the fact that we know who it would benefit in this situation.
Great.
But moving forward... yeah, let's change it right now. But moving forward, do you think that would be a better approach?
So, JR, you've talked about this a lot to me before over the years. I know you're a massive fan of this. I know you hate goal difference as a concept.
Yeah, we talked about it on the pod as well, briefly there. One of the laws I would change in the UK. We're one of the very few countries that don't do it, where if you're head-to-heads, the goal difference... And it just allows teams not to go into... If you're like, say, I don't know, Burnley against Man City, for example, you don't care if you get beat 7 or 8-0, because goal difference doesn't play a point part. You're not actually competing with Man City in the league, essentially, really. So it makes it for a better entertainment, for me anyway. Not like Burnley go and not try and attack for 86 minutes, play 5 at the back, 4 in midfield, 1 up front, and then with 5 minutes to go, they're kind of still in the game. Well, they are still in the game, and they chuck a couple of players on, they get a corner right at the death, don't they? And they could have easily got a 1-1. So yeah, I would go that head-to-head. So obviously, it would favour Man City. But I think on the flip side, it'd put those 2 games against those teams a lot more on it, kind of thing. So would those games would be like, we'll take the draw kind of thing and move on. So yeah, there's arguments for and against, but I'm definitely against having goal difference as a separation between the 2 teams. Maybe have a playoff game, winner takes all kind of thing. If it's the title and you're on goal difference, why not have a playoff game?
So I think the interesting thing with this is it doesn't just affect the top of the table, so it also affects relegation. It's one thing Spurs have had over a lot of the teams down there, and certainly say West Ham is just looking now, their goal difference is better than West Ham's by 6. It does feel a little bit strange that the destiny of your Premier League future might hang on whether you got spanked 5 or 6-0 by a team, 1 week. But I tend to agree. I don't like it as a concept. I don't think. I'm not sure about a playoff game though. I think the head-to-head's quite good.
I think the playoff game's a fun idea, but it's just not going to happen with the fixture list the way it already is. You'd be getting towards the end of the season where one of the teams has probably got a Champions League final coming up or something, and I think it would be hard for them to fit it in. This year especially, right? You got a World Cup as well.
There would have been a playoff. If it was 1-1 last week or draw last week, and they were level on goal difference, level on goals scored, there would have had to be a playoff.
Yeah, I did see 1-1 was magic number last week.
Yeah, I don't know where and when they would have played it. It would have been absolute chaos. It would have been unbelievable to watch as a neutral, though. But yeah, alas, it won't happen.
Pretty unlikely, though. That seems like the sort of thing that would happen once every 1,000 years or something.
Yeah.
But anyway, so certainly that title race is really hotting up. I think what was interesting...
One thing on City there, they need Rodri back fit, by the way.
They definitely. So what was interesting watching them play was that how slow some of the progression was through midfield. You could tell that O'Reilly isn't a natural player in that position. He's obviously a very talented player, And you also noticed Gonzalez when he came on, he was garbage. £50 million, and you can actually see why he didn't start the game. I was thinking that he would come in for, there was the option that he would come in for Rodri. But it doesn't sound like Rodri's injury is going to be too bad. They may have Southampton FA Cup game and then he'll be back.
Rodri and Reinders for £100 million combined isn't looking the best piece of business, is it, really?
They don't care, James. They don't care. One thing that was interesting watching that game was when Burnley got the corner in injury time. I'm not going to lie, I had these visions of Burnley scoring and ruining what is shaping up to be a great title race. And I think
it's happened a few times this season. In the last few months, City have had draws in games that they should have won. Look at the West Ham game. West Ham had one shot in 90 minutes and drew 1-1. So it certainly wouldn't have been the first time that City have chucked away points, and which is amazing that they're top of the league, really, when you look at some of the games they have played.
So the only other thing in terms of Premier League that's happened is in the last week we've seen both Wolves and Burnley confirmed as relegated. I definitely won't be missing Burnley. I do find, Parker and the way he sets his team up just to be so anti-football. I know they don't want to go there and get absolutely smashed every week by teams, but all season long, it's almost as if someone needs to explain to him you get 3 points for a win and only 1 point for a draw. And we've seen him just disappoint as a manager. And obviously, it's really, really hard. There's no. But you'd hope a team who came up with the points total they did would give a little bit more of an effort. And, they spent some money as well than they actually did. It's just such a lame performance. And it's been obvious, they were going down from a long, long time ago. Obviously, Wolves had a almost unprecedented season in terms of how bad it was up until recent weeks. Let's hope they finish the season strongly starting this weekend.
I will say about Burnley, talk about a team being out of their depth. They came up with some really weird numbers. If you remember, they had that crazy defensive run where they outperformed their XG in defence by miles. So they had a good defence that somehow turned into like a hardly ever conceding a goal. And then, of course, they lost Trafford in that summer. That's not going to help, right, when your super defence is your strength, and Man City come and pluck your keeper away just to put on their bench, So I think, honestly, this was just, you can talk about Parker's tactics at the top level, but this was just a team that had no business being in the Premier League, to be quite honest, and I don't think they ever stood a chance of staying up.
I think Wolves is interesting just as much as it sounds like there's a bit of tension in the camp at the moment. I think Arocadore and Mane in particular came to fisticuffs recently in the dressing room. So it sounds like, Wolves have sided with the youngster. So it sounds like Arocadore's off in the summer. They were probably trying to get rid of him anyway. I'm sure there'll be plenty more players out the door at Wolves this summer. They have had the benefit of actually planning for this for so long now. So they actually had a transfer window, which is so unusual for these teams who do go down, that you actually get the opportunity to do that. And I think what's interesting is when you look at a team like Ipswich, who are on the cusp of coming back up, they made such a terribly slow start to the season. And part of that was, turnover of players and just, I think just the disappointment of coming down. So I suspect Wolves should be coming out the blocks, that bit quicker than some teams who do come down. And it can make all the difference come the end of the season.
Yep.
So let's talk about Championship just quickly. We had more games on Tuesday and Wednesday. The most interesting one, arguably, was Leicester-Hull, in that it sent Leicester down. So that's obviously back-to-back relegations for Leicester. The only thing that could save Leicester now is if West Brom get a ridiculously large points deduction for their financial breach. Doesn't seem likely based on previous examples. I think what's interesting is seeing the sort of discontent amongst the Leicester fans towards the players. And like anyone in that situation, I'm sure they'll have to fire sale of players. There are a couple of good youngsters at Leicester that I'm sure the Premier League teams will be sniffing about.
Yeah, and it's sort of a little bit like the Villa situation, isn't it? When Villa went down, um, you got all those high earners because they've set the club up as if they're just going to be in the Premier League forever, dishing out these contracts. And Villa were in pretty bad shape until the new ownership came in. So this is the lottery of football, isn't it? You get these clubs that get themselves in trouble, and it kind of goes one of two ways. Some of them get a takeover, and it just turns everything around, and they come out smelling the roses, and then others just sort of plummet down the league into obscurity. So we'll see what happens with Leicester. I don't know. I mean, they're not one of the big boys of English football. That's the thing. I mean, they had that crazy run, but they're not. They've never been an established top flight team in my life. They're sort of a yo-yo first to second flight club, aren't they? So I don't know how they ever made that mistake of thinking, well, we're just now one of the sort of top flight clubs perennially. It doesn't work like that.
They spend a lot of money on their training ground as well, and an inordinate amount of money, like £100 million on a state-of-the-art training ground with a 9-hole golf course, 5-star hotel. Thinking that, as you say, thinking that they're now settled in the Premier League and we're now a Premier League team and we've got that aura about us. We're champions, obviously 10 years ago. Yeah, I mean,
James, do you see any similarities to a certain team next year who's going to have the best stadium in the country in the Championship? Ideas above their station.
no,
I'm not rising to this.
Did you see
Go on.
someone reply to Gary Lineker's tweet years ago about Coventry being that bad and Leicester being champions, and they brought it back again and said, "How are you feeling in the league, in League One, and we're in the 2 divisions above you now," kind of thing, as they're almost local rivals there, kind of thing. Yeah. So Coventry obviously won the championship on Tuesday night, didn't they, under Lampard? So yeah, so
that would be Coventry obviously coming up. It's going to be interesting to see how they get on. I guess one interesting point with regard to Coventry is what happens with Lampard. So I hear he only has 1 year left on his contract. I mean, surely he'll give it a go at Coventry. But if Chelsea come along and offer him crazy money, I've seen weirder things in football.
I don't know. I mean, I think you just talked about Parker, right? I think this is not a bad time for Lampard to get another job, to be honest with you, because I think it's a great story and fair play to him. It's a good achievement what he's done at Coventry. Are they going to stay up? I don't give them much chance of staying up. They could easily just take a few thrashings and you know how it goes. He could be sacked by Christmas. You know what I mean? It's not even like he's guaranteed to keep the job there. So I think if an opportunity came up, I mean, definitely if it was Chelsea, but even if like a Fulham came up or something, like honestly, I think it wouldn't be a bad time for him to, maybe get a little promotion to a bigger club.
And then I guess the other interesting results were Southampton blew probably their chance of automatic promotion with their 2-2 draw at Bristol, and then Ipswich had a comeback win against Charlton. So all to play for that second automatic place. I mean, what I would say in terms of from a Premier League perspective, obviously if Ipswich come back up, they showed last year they're no great shakes, and Millwall coming up. I mean, would they be contenders to, break the record in terms of fewest points? You'd have to think there's a chance. I mean, because they haven't got the infrastructure to spend 100 million buying new players.
Yeah, no chance. And I think what's interesting when you look at Ipswich and Southampton, early in the season, Southampton had quite good underlying numbers when you looked at the XG and stuff, and Will still got sacked. And it just, I don't know how many games in they were. It wasn't too many. But they looked like they were a reasonable side, and Ipswich have looked like maybe the best team in the division all season. And as the year goes on, they both rise up and probably going to both end up coming up, I would imagine. I think Southampton will be pretty well back for the playoffs. So, I mean, they would be interesting if they came up. I'd give them both more chance of staying up than Coventry. But some of the others like Millwall and Hull and whatever, I mean, you wouldn't give them a prayer.
So, any other football, James? caught your attention?
No, just in Spain, Barcelona won, so they're still 9 points clear. But Lamine Yamal obviously scored the winning penalty, and then went off injured straight away with a hamstring injury, which rules him out of the rest of the season. Hopefully he's back fit for the World Cup. I don't think it's too bad, but he'll be out for 6 weeks or so. Munich beat Leverkusen on Wednesday night in the Cup semi-final. Harry Kane obviously scored again. I mean, I think it's 56th for the season for Kane now. So, I mean, it's just remarkable what he's doing over there. It's just ridiculous. I know it's a Farmers League, but Diaz scored in the last minute as well to make it 2-0. And in France, PSG had a nice win on Wednesday night. They beat Nantes 3-0 at home to go 4 points clear, I think, of Lens. So, yeah, so in their game in hand kind of thing after losing at the weekend. So, yeah.
So, a couple of quick stories that sort of caught the eye this week. Obviously, BBC have axed Football Focus after 52 years, looking to expand their content elsewhere. I guess have to be sort of a little bit politically correct with this sort of stuff, but and I know you're probably the man for this, James, but I think what you've seen with things like Football Focus is, when you go down the sort of PC route of having female presenters and all this sort of stuff, it takes away a little bit of, I think, what people actually probably enjoyed back in the day, and people just don't respect it in quite the same way that they once did.
Yeah, but back in the day when we were growing up and watching it, there was no real football on TV. So it's where you get all your highlights and analysis. Now it's all over the shop kind of thing. You can watch you can watch every game if you don't live in the UK kind of thing. So that's where you got all your information from. It's like buying those magazines, remember Shoot and Match on the Saturday mornings kind of thing. And you'd either buy one or the other, and then you realise actually you buy both of them just to annoy your parents kind of thing. But that's where you got all your information and your gossip from, because there wasn't any games on TV. You'd be the odd Champions League game, but you'd never see a Premier League game really before Sky on TV. Well, Sky didn't have the Premier League, but you know what I mean. So it's just it's like Match of the Day, though, isn't it? It's just pointless programme at the moment, from my view, kind of thing. If no one watched it, everyone's watched the 10-minute highlights you can watch straight away at 5:15, less than 20 minutes after the final whistle. So it's just on at a time at 12:15 that people are going to games. If you've got families, you're doing other things as well. Who's really sitting down and watching it?
Surely BBC could have come up with a format that was vaguely interesting to a lot of people. So maybe different time slot. I mean, even when we're doing things like this podcast, we're talking about a bit later on. We were talking about some of the games coming up. There's a huge demand for thoughts upon this space. The BBC should have been able to get the very best names, pay the biggest wages, and come up with a format that actually appeals to people. I think the problem is they went down a route that just doesn't appeal to a lot of people.
Don't they really do a preview show, do they? I know Sky do a preview show briefly on a Friday evening, like 6 o'clock UK time, but BBC, yeah, it's a good point. They could have easily done a 7 o'clock show, put it out on iPlayer kind of thing, 7 to 8, and previewing the Premier League game for the weekend or whatever they want to do. But yeah, they didn't, and I'm not surprised it's going. BBC are losing interest in sport, on all sport anyway, kind of thing. So it won't be much long before they show no sport at all.
You must remember the Football Focus days, John.
Yeah, to be honest with you, when I think back nostalgically of the 90s or whatever, I think of the radio more than I do of Football Focus. So I remember being on the way to a game, I'd be listening, if I was going in the car with my dad, I'd be listening to 5 Live. I remember there was it Dominic Diamond, the Scottish fella, he used to have some sort of quiz-related slot, and then I think, was it Danny Baker? I can't remember all the pre-game stuff. Obviously, you remember afterwards. You remember 6:06 on the way home and whatever. So I connect the radio, I think, more with my experience of football rather than something like Football Focus.
So, but anyway, that's gone. So it'll be interesting to see how that gets replaced. I thought one interesting story this week was the idea of Italy taking part in the World Cup. It's clearly something pushed by probably the American World Cup officials. thinking that they could just bring Italy in to replace Iran. But I think the Italian officials have kiboshed it a little bit, and rightly so. Could you imagine Italy turning up for that tournament, having messed up the qualifying and then going on and winning it?
I mean, firstly, with Donald Trump, you can't rule anything out. So that wouldn't surprise me with him and Infantino. I mean, don't ever say that it couldn't happen, because you just don't know. But it is incredible when you look at Italy. You've got this expanded World Cup now with you've got teams like Cape Verde, Uzbekistan, and others, Curacao. Like, these real minnows are now in this expanded World Cup, and the Italians still didn't manage to qualify. So that's like 3 in a row for them. And it's tough getting out of Europe. Let's be honest. Even with the number of places that UEFA gets, like, nothing's guaranteed. I think that's one thing that England probably should get credit for, is that they've just sort of hosed up in qualifying. I don't think we've even really had any dramas in recent qualifying campaigns.
No, I think I'd definitely say it's one of the things that Southgate actually does deserve some credit for, was how smooth the qualifying sort of competitions were from an England perspective. The rest, the less said the better, but from a qualifying perspective. One thing we see at this time of year, we start seeing lots and lots of transfer gossip. You have all these pages and pages of internet sites, social media, telling us that this transfer is going to happen, this one isn't. And, I think it'd be quite fun each week just to cherry pick a few and actually just have a look at them from whether they actually make sense. Because I think one thing I do see with a lot of these transfers is you look at them and go, that doesn't even begin to make sense. So the one I want to start with would be Anthony Gordon being linked to going to Bayern Munich for best part of 75-80 million pounds. It does look like there's a good chance he will leave Newcastle. There's almost too much noise, I think, from agents and things like that, suggesting that he will be on his way. The numbers being talked about seem punchy, but I believe Bayern Munich have got someone who already plays in that left wing, James.
He's not going to Bayern Munich. He's not good enough for Bayern Munich anyway, full stop. And he's not as good as Luis Diaz, let's be honest with you. He's definitely leaving Newcastle. I see Eddie Howe this morning's come out, so he hasn't trained all week. He won't be available for the Arsenal game. Because you've dropped him, Eddie. Probably quite rightly as well. But he's bang average. He's scored 3 Premier League goals since January 2025. It's just take away his speed, and he's a championship footballer in my view.
But
Arsenal
what I was going to say is that
Arsenal could be one interested in buying him, because they do need. He is an upgrade on Martinelli, probably. He's definitely an upgrade on Trossard. So, but I don't understand where else is he going to go. He's not going to go to Man City. United, they do need a left winger kind of thing. I'm surprised he hasn't been linked with them, because they don't. If they're going to continue appointing Carrick, which looks likely, they do need some pace on the left. I mean, Dorgu obviously been injured for a while now, hasn't he, with that hamstring? Are they going to play him there? They might actually just use Dorgu there as the actual left winger. But, I mean, there's noise about Liverpool because he's a Liverpool fan and he's obviously a Scouser kind of thing. It's just not happening. It's absolute nonsense. So, but yeah.
Please, footballing gods.
About Anthony Gordon at the moment.
Please make it happen so that Anthony Gordon appears at Liverpool just to keep James happy.
Yeah, I think James. I think you pointed out on a recent episode, James, where you said that if you take away his pace, there's not much left. And I do think pace is quite overrated in football. I know this is kind of a hot take, but I think when you get to that top level, on certain teams you might have big areas of the field to run into. But I think a lot of the difference-making job for these elite footballers, forwards especially, is working in tight spaces, breaking down packed defences. And I'm not sure that you bring Gordon into like a big elite level team that he's going to be especially good at that. So, I think he's a good player at Newcastle. He'd be good at a number of clubs. But you start talking about going to the very best teams for 80 million or whatever it would be. No, I don't think he's in that bracket at all.
I just thought it was interesting that story seemed to have quite a lot of legs this week. And, when they spent a fortune on Diaz last year, Diaz has been performing really well. That, it's almost like people just don't think about the whole picture in terms of some of these transfers. So one of the transfer news this week, James, was Alisson is being linked with Juventus. So it feels like this might have a few more legs and would make a little bit more sense from all parties concerned, I think.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised at all if he does leave. Although it doesn't sound good what's going on in the background when Liverpool, we talked about it earlier, haven't we, about leadership. They are losing Mo Salah, he's obviously going, Robertson's leaving. There's talk about McAllister leaving as well, another leadership in the group. If you're talking Alisson leaving, he's another leader in the group kind of thing. So Alisson's declined massively. I mean, his legs are failing him, his hamstring, the amount of injuries he's had in the last 3 years, and it's reliability. If you can't have a keeper who's not reliable, it's very hard, as we've seen, to have a decent number two who's always going to come in and be good. They need rhythm, these goalkeepers. And yeah, he's been the best goalkeeper I've seen as a Liverpool fan ever, kind of thing. It's ridiculous how good he was. But his kicking's declined, and if we can get 10, 15 million euro for him, you kind of think after 8, 9 years of service, you go, yeah, okay, thank you very much, move on kind of thing, get you off the wages. He's beyond 200 grand a week, and if he's not playing for 25, 30% of the games every season, it's quite a lot of money to have someone not doing it. And you have got to keep him Mamardashvili. You kind of spent 25, 30 million quid on a couple of summers ago. You're going to have to, if you don't give him the number one spot, he's going to be knocking the door and say, well, I want to play, I'm 25, 26. I can go and play elsewhere now. So big decisions ahead for Liverpool. I mean, they've got so many issues, but yeah, I can see that's got legs, definitely.
So the one other interesting one was, so obviously Enzo Fernandez was linked with Real Madrid last week, and we touched on it, just saying it felt so far away from being realistic in terms of what Real Madrid currently have, what Real Madrid currently need, and what sort of player he is. But the one thing, his agent must be working overtime, because there's a lot of links this week with Manchester City, of all teams. It feels like it would be a stretch, given, is he really going to be playing instead of the likes of Cherki? It feels a stretch that they'd go and spend 80, 90 million pounds or something crazy on Enzo.
Yeah, and we don't know who's going to be the Real Madrid manager in the summer, or head coach. Is Pep Guardiola going to be there? So a lot of these players are going around. There's an awful lot of top clubs who've got question marks over their managerial appointments. Even in the Premier League, we talked about Chelsea, Man United looking like an appointing carrot, but still up in the air. Liverpool, we talked about. Man City. Arsenal will definitely keep Arteta. That's a different conversation for a different day. But even in Europe, Barcelona, will Hansi Flick stay there? Are they happy just winning the league with him, or they want more in the European Cup? Talked about Real Madrid. Atletico Madrid, is Simeone going to stay there? There's a lot of big clubs that are looking for managers, and there's players going, well, we want to know first and foremost who the manager is going to be, or who the head coach is. But yeah, Enzo to Man City links, I just think were just lazy links kind of thing. Yeah, it wouldn't get in their side, I don't think.
So if you were running Chelsea and you were in PSR trouble, let's say, and you had to bring in about 100 million by selling one of your star players, like which player would you choose to move on?
So just quickly on it, I don't think it's quite as simple as that. So I don't think it's simple like in the olden days where, on Championship Manager, it's like, I need to raise some money, I need 100 million, right? So the problem they have with Enzo Fernandez is he would be a really obvious choice. I think that they wouldn't miss him, I don't think, overly. And you're talking big numbers as well. But just in terms of the way, given how much money he costs them and the way it's all done financially, they wouldn't be getting back, in terms of being able to use that money elsewhere, what you think they would be able to. So much of it relates to how much they cost and over how many years and things like that. So I don't think it's quite as simple as just saying which player they would want to sort of sell. I think Enzo would be right up there. He never strikes me as an amazing character in the dressing room. I may be completely wrong with that. It might just be the fact that he's, Argentinian. Uh, but I mean, who would you say, James? Who would you get rid of from Chelsea?
Cole Palmer.
John, yourself?
Yeah, I sort of feel like maybe Palmer as well. Yeah, just I don't know. He's inconsistent. I think he has these eye-catching moments, and then he disappears for long stretches.
You could easily, someone like United could waste £100 million for him because they're a bit stupid at the club who they buy. And if you get £100 million for Cole Palmer, you can go and buy two or three players, kind of thing. I mean, they do have some sellable assets. You know, Caicedo would get you decent money. Estavio would get you decent money. Cucurella would probably get you decent money, kind of thing. So they do. It's not like they don't have any sellable assets. But yeah, Cole Palmer would be the one answering.
I think Caicedo's the one that you would want to keep, right? I think he feels like if Chelsea are going to be a powerhouse in the next decade, it's going to be with Caicedo in midfield.
Absolutely, yeah. Brilliant player.
So talking midfielders, obviously Man United, it's that time of year where they start being linked with everyone, particularly with Casemiro likely to be off. Looks like they're probably in the market for two central midfielders. You know, they've been linked with Baleba, Chumani, Wharton, Anderson, all sorts of names. Tough to, Tonali, I think he'll be quite difficult to get. But it'd be interesting because if I do think if Man United were to get two top quality central midfielders, suddenly you look at that United, when you look at how their front line, they get two quality midfielders, add in a couple of other areas, and suddenly they're looking quite a decent, team. Obviously, without Carrick, I would put that out there. But I don't think they're miles. Honestly, with two quality central midfielders, I don't think they're miles away from being quite competitive. I can see you shaking your head vigorously, James.
The goalkeepers bang average, and they haven't got any centre backs and haven't got any full backs. Apart from that, their back five is good. Just they don't. The goalkeeper's not going to do you anything. They've got centre backs. Delit's not a Premier League player and he's injured. Maguire's 33, he's not a starter. Euro hasn't really gone on and developed. I know he's only a kid. Martinez, Luke Shaw. Remember, they're going to have games next. At the moment, they've played 40 games this season. They're not playing any midweek games. Like, they should be where they are, kind of thing. Really, because they're just not playing. They've got players can recuperate from injuries. Let's see how they do when they're playing 8 Champions League games, 6 before Christmas. They'll probably go further in the Carabao Cup as well. Let's see how Carrick takes a job where he's got no time on the training field. Their defence is bang average. It really is, absolutely. Yeah. They've got a lot of money needed to be spent to be worried about doing anything. Yeah, they do need 2 midfielders, but they need a lot more as well. And do you trust Ineos to spend well? Because they've shown they haven't really. I know they've bought Mbremo and Cunha, but they overpaid for both of them, surely, if you look at it.
I don't know. I just feel like I don't think they're as far away. Probably, I think last summer ended up being a reasonable transfer window for them all said and done. I think someone like Lamens, for example, whilst I don't think he's incredible, I also don't. He's not called Onana. It's he hasn't disgraced himself in any shape or form. He looks a very competent keeper. And what they actually have is they have a few underrated. I think Yoro looks okay. The likes of Dallo and people like that, they're very workable sort of Premier League quality players, and I think they obviously need a little bit more quality. But let's say they were to go and sign a Van de Ven or something, stick him in the middle of that defence. Suddenly, honestly, I don't think United are miles and miles away. Yes, they may lack a bit of squad depth, but I think when you have as much quality as they do in forward areas, you're going to be dangerous.
I think what's interesting when you look at the midfielders that they've been linked with, it sort of sums up how difficult the transfers are in the modern game. And I was looking at the number of starts that each of these players has made at the top level. And so you've got Baleba, 66, Wharton has made 57 starts, Anderson has made 79 starts, Mateus Fernandez, 64 starts. So you're asking to be paying what is going to be 80 million or so for some of these guys who, you still, they've only got maybe 2 seasons worth of football at the top level. And it's just hard to know. I mean, you don't have this huge sample. If you look at, say, Declan Rice as a comparison, who I feel like Declan Rice, and I mean, he cost a lot of money, but he, to me, was about as safe a buy as you could have made just based on what he had done. So he had made 190 starts for West Ham. He'd obviously been in the team since he was like 17 or 18. He was their star player. They'd done well under him, right? With him at the centre of the team, they'd been in the top six and won a trophy and whatever. So it sort of like felt like someone like Declan Rice checked all the boxes. So he was 100 million. But then for 80 million, you're having to get someone who's maybe only got a couple of years under their belt. They've played in one system, right? Which you don't know how that's going to translate. If you look at someone like Wharton as an example, right? He's playing in a Crystal Palace team where they're on the counter-attack. So he wins the ball and he's got 80 yards of open space to pass to people. And don't get me wrong, he looks like a fantastic player, right? To the eye test, as do a lot of these guys. But we've been watching football a long time. How many transfers go badly? More than half. Like every summer, almost every buy looks good at the time, right? That's why they pay the money for them. And then you look back 3 or 4 years later and you go, oh, that one didn't work out. Oh, that one didn't either, because of injuries or change in system or all sorts of factors. So, they're all risky buys, and it is difficult.
I tell you what I would say, by the way, that Fernandez at West Ham, he really catches the eye at the moment when you watch him. Obviously got him from Southampton last year, but I think whether West Ham stay up or not, he will be gone for decent money. And he's actually quite an interesting example of what you'll see will be the cost of relegation to West Ham. If West Ham stay up, I think they'll be able to get really good money for him, as in 60, 70 million plus. If they get relegated, suddenly you can almost chop 20 million off that, because he will want out of that club. And it's actually really hard, I think, for relegated clubs to get sort of true market value for their players.
Well, I don't know, because you say that. I mean, it literally happened to him 1 year ago, right? He got relegated with Southampton, and West Ham still paid, 40 million? It wasn't cheap. So, and obviously the price will be higher now because he's achieved more. He's played with West Ham and had a pretty good season. So I'm not sure I fully buy that. I still think there's a good market for these Premier League proven players. I think they'd still be able to get a decent fee, I think.
You're just trying to protect Spurs, the value of the Spurs players for when they go down. Trying to
we can talk about Spurs in a minute.
Trying to pretend that Van der Ven and Romero's value is going to be the same if they're in the Championship as in the Premier League. All right, that's enough. Oh, just quickly, James, one transfer you mentioned to me yesterday. I laughed at it, but you think Rodgers, Liverpool, Curtis Jones?
I was a bit winding you up, but I wouldn't be surprised. No, the Rodgers plus 2 million quid for Curtis Jones. Yeah. Rodgers plus 40 or 50 for Curtis Jones. It wouldn't surprise me at all. I think Curtis Jones will leave. If Slot, I don't think Slot will stay. But I think Curtis Jones is looking to get more wages as a Premier League player. It wouldn't surprise me if he does leave Liverpool, and it wouldn't surprise me if Rodgers came in the other way.
I do not see Curtis Jones ending up at Villa. I think Villa pretty burnt by what happened with Elliott. Obviously, slightly different players. I just don't honestly see it. But who knows? I can definitely see Roger. I can definitely see Rodgers leaving Villa. By the way, I think that's more likely than not. Although again, like any of these things, I think he has to be a little bit careful in terms of where he goes. If he goes to a Chelsea, for example, you can easily see him, ruining his career pretty much. But let's...
Yeah, similar thing, by the way. Similar thing. Rodgers only made, I think, 78 starts at the top level. So again, he looks good. Of course he looks good. That's why people are linking him with a big move. But it's not guaranteed that you're going to sign Morgan Rodgers and he's going to be a star forward for one of the top sides. He could easily end up just sort of looking bang average, I think.
I genuinely would, if Villa get an offer of around 100 million or something in that sort of vicinity. I know there's a big sell-on clause.
You're not getting 100 million for him. No.
Well, I think the sell-on clause will make a difference. I think Middlesbrough have got a 20% sell-on clause. So I don't, at 70, 80 million, it just doesn't actually make any sense for Villa. If you're only actually going to, let's say it was 80 million, Villa only walk away with, say, 64, you got all the other bit, you can't replace these players these days for 50, 60 million, if so. But we'll wait and see. Let's talk about this weekend's games. We have lots of interesting ones. Just starting with tonight's games, it's actually a game I have pretty strong opinions on, actually. Sunderland Forest. I touched on the podcast on Monday. The price has changed a little bit since. I don't understand how Sunderland are a bigger price to win this game than Nottingham Forest. Any thoughts, gents?
Well, I think it feels like it could go a little bit like Monday's game. I think with Forest being in an even stronger position than West Ham, they'll be thinking a point is probably not too bad. And Sunderland is just such a sort of miserable defensive team. You could just see it ending up being just a really dire 0-0 stalemate, right? I know what you're saying about price-wise. It all comes down to how much you would factor in the relegation motivation level. There's 3 games that are like that this weekend, with obviously West Ham and Spurs as well. So there's always been a debate, right? Some people think, well, it just shouldn't make a difference at all. But I think historically there are examples of teams that try a bit harder when they're fighting relegation. So I think that's been priced in to an extent. But I also, Forest, I think, have been fairly poor, and some of the results have flattered them quite a lot, I think, over the last few months. I know against Spurs, they scored 3 times from 7 or 8 shots, I think they had in that match. And then last week against Burnley, they scored 4 from 10 shots. So, they're probably not playing as well as the results would suggest.
I think what was interesting last week against Burnley is they literally had 4 shots on target, scored 4 times in that second half. When you see unsustainable things, it is things like that. And I think Sunderland, obviously, from a metrics point of view, everyone realises they're going to regress a little bit. But I saw Sunderland at close quarters, even just last weekend against Villa, and I'll tell you what I think Sunderland have, and that's a really, really good core. So that midfield trio of Diarra, Xhaka and Siddiqui is really, really impressive. And when I look at even a team like Villa, is what we're seeing increasingly is in the Premier League is one of the most important things is how good that central midfielder, those central midfielders are. So if you look at something like Tottenham, they've been very weak in that area, I think, in terms of the last couple of years, and I think it's sort of borne out a little bit in terms of the results. And I think it's a little bit underrated in terms of Sunderland, and I think Sunderland, they're sneaky good in those areas.
Yeah, and once again, when you talk about experience, what a fantastic signing Xhaka's been. And, all the sort of the Moneyball side of things would say, well, you shouldn't pay that sort of money for someone his age. I think it was like 25 million or something in his 30s. So, yeah, on the face of it, it looks like a poor value buy. But again, it's the intangibles I think that these players bring. Especially, I think Sunderland are a fairly young side otherwise. So the difference, I think, that he comes in with a bit of leadership and experience in the centre of midfield has been massive for them.
Any thoughts, James?
0-0. I think, John, there's not a game I'll be sitting down and going, yeah, must sit down with a cold beer tonight, 8 o'clock, and watch that. I think John's right. I think Forest will be delighted with a point there. If you offered Nuno a point now at whatever time it is, Friday morning, I think you'd say, yeah, happy days. And
well, so. I think something you touched on, John, which was in terms of motivations. So obviously everyone knows Forest is fighting for lives. Sunderland still have chances to qualify for Europe, so it's not like it's a dead rubber for them. They still have stuff to play for, and I don't know. I don't see. Everything I've seen from Forest this year wouldn't suggest. Even if this game was on a neutral venue, are we really saying that Forest are that much better than Sunderland?
I've got a couple of injuries.
I just don't see it.
Hudson-Odoi's out for the season with a leg injury, had surgery, I think, and Murillo's out as well tonight, isn't he? So
And that's really important, Murillo, because he'll be up against Broby. He would have been up against Broby, and Broby is a real handful. And I think they'll miss him in terms of trying to actually deal with him. So there's lots of things to look at, but I don't give too many football opinions on here, but I do like opposing Forest. I think would be the better way of saying it tonight.
And Forest have got some tricky games after this. So if they did lose this one, I think after this they go to Chelsea. I think, but yeah, I think even though they look kind of safe-ish at the moment, being 5 points ahead of Spurs. It's quite a big game for them. I think if they lose tonight, they could get dragged right into it.
Yeah, they're away at Chelsea on the 4th of May on that bank holiday here in the UK. A 3 p.m. kickoff in the UK on Monday. It's just a random time on the bank holiday.
So, biggest game tomorrow is obviously Fulham Aston Villa. I will be going there to watch it with my 2 daughters, one of whom is going to the game for the first time. The other one's been to this fixture a few times now. So it will be interesting. Villa actually have a really good record in this fixture in recent times. So I'm intrigued to see how it goes. It's obviously not the most exciting for the neutral, given that Villa not guaranteed top 5, but any sort of result here and almost certain. Fulham, very outside chances of qualifying for Europe now, I think. Elsewhere on Saturday, we obviously have Liverpool Palace. Palace have been kryptonite for Liverpool, I think, in recent times. You looking forward to that one, James?
No. Liverpool just need to win, don't they, really? You just don't know what team Palace are going to put out, do you, really? Because, again, we talked about them, they've got a Europa League... No, not the Europa League, Conference League game on Thursday. I don't know, that's 5 days. But yeah, Liverpool haven't won in 3 this season against Palace at all. What did they do last season? They drew at home when Liverpool won a title anyway, so that's kind of a relevant game of football. Yeah, it's just... looks like Woodman will be in goal for Liverpool, the third choice. Mamardashvili's obviously injured. And Alisson, they said he might be fit, but don't trust what managers say in press conferences is one big thing anyway regarding injuries and things like that. So yeah, it's just Liverpool aren't playing well, haven't played well. We've talked about it to blue in the face. It bores me kind of thing. Yeah, it's just a win. It's just a game they need to win kind of thing. Now that Chelsea are that bad, and if they win, they go 8 points clear kind of thing of Brighton, things like that. So yeah,
I do find this game interesting just from a sort of matchup perspective. In terms of we have all the tactico boys all over social media and experts. But what I find fascinating about this game is Palace and the way they set up to play against Liverpool. Clearly, they massively overachieve relative to sort of other games. Now, some of that may just be noise, bit of variance, but actually when you watch the matches themselves, there's way more to it than that. And if you ever want credence for how important matchups are between teams, this is, one of the first types of games you actually look at.
They do have Isak now. I mean, that's going to be interesting. I don't know how many games Isak's actually started this season, but it's almost like a forgotten man that they've got this £140 million striker. So I mean, if you talk about games for a player like that, right? That's why you spend the big bucks on a centre forward for these home games against teams that like to sit deep, and you got to break them down. So it'll be interesting. You've got a few games, I guess, till the end of the season to show what you can do.
West Ham Everton, huge game for West Ham. I don't think it's going to be a particularly easy game. I think Everton are always tough to beat. Moyes going back there as well. It's always interesting. I think we've seen with Everton, for example, in recent weeks, they should have beaten Arsenal. They could arguably have beaten Liverpool last weekend. They've been super competitive. They're super organised. Obviously, Branthwaite injury last week, not ideal. But I think it's going to be a tricky game for West Ham. Again, everyone just talks about the relegated teams down the bottom. Home game. They have to win this game. I actually think it's a really tricky game for West Ham.
It is, but I mean, when you look at the prices, well, last time I looked, I think they were about what 2.5 or something like that. West Ham. So it just feels like of the three relegation contenders, they seem like the ones that they aren't really getting a massive boost to their price for the the relegation factor. Because I think the way West Ham have been playing is reasonably well, I'd say, with Somerville in such good form, and so I sort of think if you ignored the relegation factor, I think the prices kind of look about right, and so. I think I was expecting that maybe they'd be nudged a little bit more down towards sort of 2.3, 2.2, based on the fact that how big a game it is for them. But again, maybe, I don't know, maybe Nuno might just think, oh, another draw might not be too bad. At least that, nudges us away from Spurs. But who knows? I don't know. I sort of, maybe it's my pessimism, but I'm sort of expecting West Ham to win this one.
I think that's with your Tottenham hat on.
Probably.
Quickly, the one worry about West Ham is the goalkeeper is absolute garbage. The lad that they spend £18 million on for
Hermanson.
Yeah, he's just a liability, complete liability. West Ham, obviously, Karen Brady's leaving West Ham, hasn't she? She's offered her resignation. I think was it Tuesday this week? I can't think. She's finally leaving there. So probably some good news for West Ham supporters. I don't. Everton have got a good away record, and they're still fighting for Europe. Everton, they've still got, as you say, Luke, early. They've still got chances of getting, maybe not the Europa League, but definitely the Conference League. We could have 11 teams in the Premier League in Europe next season. 11 teams in the Premier League, so they're still, and they are a much better team set up away from home, and they have been playing well. Everton. They've got some, like Dewsbury Hall's back after his injury, hamstring. He was good on Sunday against Liverpool. Beto scored a goal a game, kind of thing. It's not, as you say, it's not an easy game for West Ham, kind of thing. That is. And another point, quickly, do you reckon? I know it's the same time as the Wolves Tottenham game. Do you reckon they'll keep an eye on that result, kind of thing, or the game going on, or they just solely focus on that? Say Tottenham are winning and you're drawing at home to Everton. Was 5-10 minutes ago. Do you go, right, we need to win this game, or we're gonna chance to win the game, or do you go, we'll back down the hatches, we'll take the point here, kind of thing? Do you actually keep an eye on the game? Do you reckon Nuno and West Ham will keep an eye on the game, or they'll just think, oh, what will be, we'll take our own, we'll worry about the game at 5-5 when the other game's finished and our game's finished?
I think it's so difficult just to flick a switch and say we're going to try and win this game with 5-10 minutes to go. Given the importance of wins relative to draws at home, they should be trying to do that anyway, really.
Yeah.
I do think that last game of the season might be a little bit different, but I think up until that point, I think what I'd say for West Ham is if they can come out this weekend getting the same result as Tottenham, however that may be, whether that be Tottenham not winning at Wolves or West Ham winning, I think this would be possibly the decisive weekend in terms of that relegation battle. Because I think if Tottenham don't make ground up on West Ham this weekend, Tottenham have got a couple of tricky fixtures coming up. It could get very tricky for Tottenham. So I think this weekend is really, really important in that relegation battle. At which point, let's come on to it. John, feeling confident about going to Wolves, having just lost 4-0 and 3-0. Whipping boys. Obviously, Tottenham haven't won this calendar year. 1.73. I'll let you take it.
Well, I mean, I'm not saying I would pile on at the price or anything, but I mean, I'm certainly more confident than I was a week ago because I think that the performance against Brighton was, look, it was nothing extraordinary, but it was the best we've played for several months, and especially if you consider how good Brighton have been in other matches. And, you look at Xavi Simons, it's a bizarre state of affairs because I think for weeks and weeks and weeks, everyone's been saying, like, well, why isn't he playing Xavi Simons? Whether it was Igor Tudor in charge, De Zerbi came in and for the first game, didn't play him until like the 85th minute, even though, I mean, you probably saw that game at Sunderland, right? You're just thinking Spurs are crying out for some creativity here, and he doesn't bring him on till 85th minute. And so you're just wondering what's going on. And then lo and behold, he starts him at home against Brighton. Man of the match, I'd say. He was pretty much central to everything good that Spurs did. Got an assist, got a goal, hit the post, got cramp. But I actually thought that the weird cramp situation was maybe quite revealing. I mean, because normally you associate something like that with like a non-league player in a big cup match or something, right? Where it's like, well, this guy, is not used to sort of running this much, but it's a big game, so he's pushed himself extra, and so you do wonder if is that part of what's been going on with Xavi Simons, that maybe his conditioning just hasn't been there or something, or is it just maybe it is to do with this relegation factor that we talk about, that yeah, suddenly these players now are just finding sort of extra motivation and pushing themselves more where even their body can't handle it. So I don't know, but it certainly gives me some optimism, assuming that he'll start again, because if you look at the rest of the Spurs lineup, the midfielders, not exactly a creative bunch. The forwards are nothing special, and it all just seems very disjointed, trying to get the ball up there and create chances without someone like him in the team.
I think he's probably suffering from dehydration, John. All those tears he shed. Honestly, I maintain that was one of the most extraordinary things I can remember seeing. I've never seen someone celebrate so hard a goal with so long left in a game. It just felt very weird. It felt all, and even at the end, it just felt all about him. It didn't actually feel about Spurs at all. It just felt about him. And I know he's had a tough time since he's been at Tottenham, but
yeah, I don't really get drawn into stuff like that, because I think if he didn't celebrate, he'd get a load of abuse for that, right? They would say, oh, he doesn't care or whatever. So I don't know. I think it's easy to overread into some of these things. And I mean, I enjoyed it, to be honest. I think even though, yeah, there was 15, 20 minutes left, and I've heard people say, oh, maybe they took their eye off the ball because they acted like they scored the winner and whatever. I just like seeing a bit of emotion in football, to be honest with you. I like seeing players celebrating and running into the crowd and everyone going crazy. He got booked for taking his shirt off. Does anyone actually think that's a necessary rule after all these years? I don't know who's really suffering when the player takes his shirt off. I don't know. But yeah, I'm fine with it. I don't really get involved in sort of over reading into little bits like that.
Any thoughts, James? You cheering on Wolves?
He's lucky he's playing this week. Should have been sent off, shouldn't he, for taking his shirt off and jumping into the crowd. It's an entertainment sport. That is another rule, amongst others. Yeah, it should be. It's an entertainment sport, you say. Taking a shirt off. Who is it actually really offending? It's like
yeah, I'd love to know what the meeting was like when they first came up with that. Like, who even suggested it? Well, this is a real problem in football. These shirts coming off. We've got to crack down on it. Like, who even thought about that?
But it's a bit like the celebrations, the way they tried to clamp down, or you can't celebrate like this. It's just killjoys. But let's not sugarcoat it. This is, you'd have to say this is the biggest game. I would say, arguably the biggest game Spurs have had in, since probably
Ever?
a Champions League final.
Ever?
Don't know about ever. We did play in the Champions League final, yeah. I mean, I don't know. I've talked about this with Luke, and there is part of me that wonders if Spurs went down, they could end up in a better situation long term. Firstly, you could end up getting a takeover. That's what we just talked about with Leicester, right? Is that sometimes with these clubs, Villa being an example, you go the wrong way, and that's what ends up making you an attractive buy, because you're sort of a distressed asset. And Villa obviously got bought by this wealthy Egyptian guy that's pumped in £1 billion and really turned them around. But you don't know how it's going to go. No one knows how it's going to go. A lot of people are trying to speculate. Oh, if Spurs go down, then this will happen or that will happen. It just hasn't really happened before. Like this would be an unprecedented thing in English football. And yeah, of course. Man United went down in the 70s. Spurs went down in the 70s. It was a different time in football. Like, you just survived on gate receipts. It wasn't really going to affect your revenue that much. Now with all the TV money and everything, we don't really know how it would affect Spurs if they went down. I did hear one stat, and I don't know if this is true, but apparently the income that Spurs make from their stadium, from all the concerts and stuff that they put on the NFL and things, just that income is higher than any championship club's entire revenue. So you're talking about a club that's going to just absolutely dwarf all the other teams in the championship, and so I feel like honestly, if Spurs went down, it'd be an embarrassment for the club, but they could just sell about 10 players to cover the lost revenue. They'd still have a really good side and build around some youngsters and come back up. I think that probably would be the most likely, but I don't want to find out. I hope it doesn't happen.
I don't want to say this, but the team who finished 18th last year has obviously gone and done the double relegation. The team the year before, who went down, Luton, they did the double relegation. So, I mean, we can all but hope that, imagine, John. I think it's interesting because Wolves have obviously got nothing to play for in this game but pride, and this does feel very different to say Sunderland and Everton. In terms of some of the other battles where you've got teams who are actually still fighting for stuff. Wolves have literally got nothing but pride to play for here, so I tend to think that factoring in, that in these situations makes a lot more sense. But I still think Tottenham haven't won a game in the league since December. I think 28th of December it was. That's an awful long time, and it does feel like Spurs will be under pressure. Everyone expects them to win this game, so I think that first goal will be really, really important.
I don't know if you've ever been in a casino when there's been like a run of reds or blacks on on the roulette. So if there's been like 8 reds in a row, you'll suddenly find there'll be like a whole bunch of Chinese fellas around this table, because of course they think that black must be coming in. So I guess those fellas will be absolutely piling on Spurs to win this weekend because they haven't won for about 4 months. We're clearly due.
But yeah, massive game, and then obviously the later game on Saturday afternoon's massive as well. We've got Arsenal, Newcastle. I guess on paper this looks like one of Arsenal's trickier fixtures left in terms of the title race. It's going to be interesting. I think it's good for them that they've actually had a little bit of time off this week to probably process that City game, get a few players fit, a bit healthier, and I think they're playing Newcastle at a really good time. I think this Newcastle team, they don't have Gordon, and I don't know, they just look very, very average.
Isn't Bruno back though?
Bruno will be back.
Joel Linton suspended. I think he's got his 10th yellow card of the season. He should probably have 20. He probably should get booked every game, Joel Linton. He's just a thug. He runs around kicking people. But yeah, it is a good time to play Newcastle. It's just, as you said, Luke, I think Arsenal having a week off out of the public eye kind of thing, just letting all the pressure on City on against Burnley kind of thing. There's not much talk even in the last 48 hours about Arsenal and Arteta kind of thing. It's going to ramp up obviously tomorrow, and then they've got Champions League against Atletico Madrid next week as well, next Wednesday night. So they just have to keep on winning, don't they, really? But they haven't got a great record at home to Newcastle. So Newcastle do cause them, but this was a different Newcastle last season with Gordon and Isak and things like that, and Murphy off on the right. So yeah, but Bruno Guimaraes back is huge for Newcastle. He's their best player, kind of thing.
I know it sounds cliched and just used it for the Wolves game, but the first goal in this game, Arsenal, if Arsenal can score relatively early on, and everyone sort of settles the nerves, I could see Arsenal winning comfortably. I think the Emirates has a real tendency at the moment to be very, very sort of skittish, get nervous unbelievably quickly, and I think it's tough for that not to translate through to the players.
I assume Saka's still out though, and I think honestly, I know Saka is not having his best season, but I think he is underrated how much they miss them, just of all the things he brings to the team in terms of like linking up play, progressing the ball, and maybe he hasn't had a great season in terms of goals and sort of eye-catching numbers, but especially given how bang average a lot of their other forwards are, you take him out and I mean, they just look so ordinary going forward. So, I don't know. I think with Bruno back, it's obviously huge for Newcastle. And I think with Arsenal, if they don't score from corners, it can all just be a bit of a struggle for them to create chances. And it seems to me, I haven't checked the numbers on this, but it feels like the corners are drying up a little bit for Arsenal as the season goes on. And I don't know if that's just sort of random chance, or do you think perhaps it's just that as managers get the chance to just watch video after video after video of what Arsenal are doing, they come up with game plans to maybe stop them, and maybe that is just a slightly less effective weapon for them?
I think there's a few factors at play. I definitely think variance is a factor, particularly when you're talking about how random it is in terms of headers back across the box, for them to fall to your players. I do think, the referees are probably looking for things far more now than they were at certain points in the season. I think teams have got a little bit cleverer in terms of how they try and defend against them as well. So I think there's a few factors at play. I think the other thing is, Saka used to take a lot of the corners from his side in terms of in-swinging corners. Obviously, Rice would take them from the other side, and obviously Saka's missing. So I just wonder if the quality of delivery isn't potentially quite what it has been as well. So I think you have a few sort of factors at play. Any thoughts, James?
Yeah, I think John's right with Saka kind of thing. He hasn't had a great season. I think he's 25, and I'd worry about his future kind of thing. Newcastle, they're just bang average. Like, who plays in goal for Newcastle tomorrow night? Do they bring back Pope? Because Ramsdale's been ordinary kind of thing. So I think Newcastle, they lost 4 in a row, I think, as well. It's just tricky for them. I think the first goal was massive, and especially if they get it from open play as well. It'll settle the nerves down. But Arteta needs to stop whining on the touchline. He won't, because it goes to the players and it goes to the fans. So yeah, it is the pressure on them. I probably expect Arsenal. They played well. Let's be honest. They played well against Man City in spades and patches at the weekend. So it wasn't nice. It's the best performance for a while, anyway. Put it that way. So yeah, it's.
And then, so no Premier League games. So no Premier League games on Sunday. We have Man United Brentford on Monday evening. We can talk about that on Monday's podcast, I think. So what we do have this weekend is we have the 2 FA Cup semi-finals. On Saturday evening we have Man City Southampton, and then on Sunday afternoon we have Chelsea Leeds. Just because of quirk in the schedules, that Man City game is the same time as the Arsenal game, or within 15 minutes of it. So I can't imagine too many people will be watching City Southampton. I know I certainly won't be. I think, obviously City Southampton. Any thoughts?
Well, one thing I just wanted to say about the FA Cup, that this is going to be the 10th season in a row that either Man City or Chelsea have been in the FA Cup final, which, I mean, unless they both lose, which seems unlikely, as long as one of them gets through. But that's incredible, isn't it, when you think of 10 years in a row having one of those two teams. And I mean, it probably tells you something, doesn't it? Because if you think of the amount of money sloshing around those two clubs, one thing they do both have is incredible youth systems, and I wonder if that is something that really helps them in terms of competing on multiple fronts, because especially in those early rounds, they're able to just have that squad depth, where they can bring in some players from the youth team that just sort of give players a rest. I don't know if that maybe helps a little bit, but it does seem like the likes of Liverpool, who have been fantastic in the league under Klopp, I don't think they were ever especially strong in the domestic cups. I think they essentially just had to say, look, we're focusing on the league and the Champions League. We just did not have the resources to be going all out for the League Cup and the FA Cup as well. So yeah, it's kind of boring really to just keep having Man City and Chelsea in the FA Cup final. But it's probably going to be both of them. I'd imagine it'd be the most likely final.
At least with the Southampton game, Southampton are coming into this in great form. So, it's not like the Chelsea game against Port Vale, where Port Vale are sort of bottom of League One, like terrible team. At least Southampton should be vaguely competitive. Obviously shouldn't have enough quality, but and then Sunday, obviously we have Chelsea Leeds. Any particular thoughts? It's obviously going to be interesting with Rosenior not being there to see how the players sort of respond. Leeds have looked good recently.
Yeah, I mean, Leeds fans are annoyed. I've spoken to a couple in the last 48 hours since Rosenior's gone, because it's probably made the game harder for them. Yeah, quickly going back to Man City. Good to see that they've returned 10,000 tickets for their allocation out of their 32,000 for tomorrow's game. So it won't be a sellout at Wembley tomorrow for Man City. Again, they'll have a flag over their empty seats, but they need new extra seats at the Etihad, obviously. So that's just a little side aspect of them being a big club with fan base. But tomorrow, Sunday's game, Chelsea. Watch them start running around, and attitude will be a lot better. They won't be doing what they did against Brighton. But Leeds were in form and playing really well and got a great team spirit. That game's a lot more fun to watch, I think. Although Southampton tomorrow night, they'll give a good go. They played well against Arsenal in the quarter-final, that Saturday evening game, didn't they? So, and they're what, 18 unbeaten? The form team in Europe? So, it's two interesting games. I don't think they're foregone conclusions whatsoever. Leeds will fancy their chances big time on Sunday afternoon. They're playing well, Leeds. And they will give Chelsea some problems. Because is that going to start up front, or is it João Pedro? We don't know about the team use obviously yet when we're doing this podcast. So, Estavio's obviously out. He's got a really bad injury, hasn't he? So, it'd be a fun game to watch. I do like watching FA Cup when it's the only standalone games as well. It's a bit annoying that the other game's on tomorrow, but that's because of this 3 p.m. blackout.
I will say, just touching on Man City fans and the return tickets, I have got some sympathy for these northern clubs, because the games are always in London. And I miss the days when they had the FA Cup semis at a neutral ground. I think that was just such a fun feature of the competition. I mean, I've been to a few semis. I think we've lost every single one that I've been to, but it's still it's such a different day out. I've I went to Ellen Road in '95 when we lost to Everton, for example, and you just you don't really experience anything like that where you get sort of half a neutral stadium each, and just it made going to Wembley that bit more special, right? When you got to the final, and now it's like, well, everything's at Wembley, semis and final, and Man City have had a lot of success, and so I can understand why there's fans that don't want to just keep forking out the money and travelling down to Wembley. And of course, it's against Southampton, and everyone's expecting them to win. So I think I'd give them a pass for that one.
I'm in your camp with this, John. I think it's so unrealistic to expect. City fans, obviously they've had a ton of success, but all the Champions League games, all the extra games that they have in any given season, it's not like they have one cup run. They're going deep in every single competition every year. The prices aren't coming down. Money's, is tighter for everyone. And, if something has to give, Southampton in the semi-final would seem like a pretty obvious place to start.
Yep.
Never mind, James. You're outvoted. But the Chelsea, it's interesting from a Chelsea perspective because this could represent their chance of getting into Europe if the league doesn't pick up. So it's obviously a big game for them. And as you say, I think with Leeds having got that draw against Bournemouth and getting that extra point, it means they can probably go a little bit. They're not worried about the league and staying up. I don't think now in quite the same way they might have been. It's where it's actually been a really big sort of 7-10 days for them, getting that United result, then beating Wolves last weekend, and then picking up those points against Bournemouth. Those 7 points was, not particularly expected, particularly that United one. It just means they have a bit more of a go at this one, I think.
Yeah, and it's interesting actually when you talk about being a good chance to get into Europe, and before we finish, I wanted to touch on the Europa League, because actually, when you look at the route to winning the Europa League now, I mean, this year you've got Villa are in the semis with Forest, Freiburg, and Braga. Spurs won it last year, beating Bodo Glimt in the semis, a poor Man United side in the final. It's a much weaker competition now than it used to be, and I think that sort of makes it more attractive for teams getting into it, because then, of course, that is a path to the Champions League. And I was looking also at the teams in the Conference League. It's almost like the Europa League and Conference League are not as far apart as as we think of them. these days. I think even last year, if you think, well, Chelsea won the Conference League last year as finishing in top five in the Premier League, whereas Man United and Spurs were down in the bottom half. And this year, you've got Palace, you've got Strasbourg. I can't remember who the other team are in it. It's Shakhtar Donetsk and another one. It's pretty comparable, I think, to the Final Four, apart from Villa, who are obviously
So
a little bit better.
I think the final four might be. I think the big difference with the Conference League is you only play 6 group games, and the group games are incomparable. So you're playing against like Shamrock, and you're playing against the most horrendous teams in those group stages in the Conference League. Whereas at least in the Europa League, you actually still have, you're still playing like your Fenerbahce's, and you're playing some proper teams, and it's not a gimme that you're going to finish in the top 8, as Forest showed themselves, and then I think what's happened in this particular Europa League is that the better teams have all been drawn in the same side of the draw, so that Forest Villa side of the draw, where the likes of Porto's and obviously Forest took, even your Midtjylland, and so it's become a very lopsided draw, which means that, it looks like a terrible semi-final, and it is on the other side, but that's partly just because of the sort of vagaries of the draw. I think it's, a lot of the good teams have already gone as well.
Yeah, and speaking of which, that's another thing that they changed that has annoyed me, is this thing where they did the draw for the whole bracket in one go. Same in the Champions League, of course, and it just sort of it makes it less exciting. But it also, when a team gets a really easy draw, like Arsenal, for example, and all the way through that they're going to have that easy draw pretty much. Obviously, it helped that Barcelona got knocked out, but yeah, it does. It's quite deflating, I think, because at least if you get a good draw, but it's done live each time, there's that sort of excitement factor. But when they just draw it at the start of the bracket and you realise that all the good teams have gone into one half, it just sort of it feels less fair somehow, right? Even though it's random.
I certainly think it feels less exciting. You think in this Champions League, so if the semi-finals had been a random draw and you'd had Paris Saint-Germain, Bayern, Arsenal, and Athletic Madrid, that would be an interesting four, and let's say it pans out as it has done, that's fine, but it would definitely be it feels like they're taking away some of the spectacle, as you say, of you'd think they would want eyes on that sort of thing. Normally it's a good excuse for them, all the mercenaries to go and meet somewhere and have lots of lunches and expenses. They seem to be sacrificing that. It seems extraordinary.
Yeah, I don't know if that's why they knocked it on the head. Maybe it was just costing them too much money for have these enormous jollies every couple of weeks.
Obviously, we do have Champions League this week. Paris Saint-Germain, Bayern on Tuesday, Atletico Madrid, Arsenal on Wednesday. We'll talk about those games in more detail on Monday. I think any other thoughts before we wrap it up, guys?
Not from me.
So, thank you for coming on, John. Where can people find your esteemed work?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, fellas. Great fun. If anyone wants to check me out on Substack, you can find me. My publication is called Unsupervised Football, and I just write about all sorts of random football things. I've been doing a little bit of stuff on the World Cup lately, looking at home advantage in the World Cup, and all sorts of stuff on the Premier League, and come check it out if you like.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, we'll have it. There's a link in. We'll put all the links in anyway on the channels, however you listen or watch this. So yeah, and any questions, let us know. There's a good weekend of sport as well, isn't it? Snooker's on, a bit of cricket kind of thing. So there's always some horse racing going on at Sandown as well. So next week's big horse racing in Ireland as well, Punchestown. So there's always a lot of sport, obviously, as the football season comes to a close. But yeah, all good. Have a good weekend. Sun looks like it's out here in London for a change. So yeah, Luke, enjoy Fulham, Aston Villa. If you wake up after tonight's game between Sunderland and Nottingham Forest.
We will see. We will see. I wouldn't mind, right? But say tomorrow, I've got to take my daughter to a football match in the morning. Everything she's got a swimming gala in the afternoon. In the afternoon, James. It's no end of fun.
Enjoy.
Enjoy. Cheers.